Coming together to better understand our school systems, to share resources, and to support the success and well-being of all students. We have a full agenda today, and you will hear from both students as well as our panel of education leaders, and also from you, the community.
바쁘신 가운데 오늘 저희 한림회에서 처음으로 받는 이 제를 위한 에듀케이션 타운홀 미팅에 참석해 주신 학부모님들께 진심으로 감사드립니다. 우리 자녀들이 더 나은 환경에서 성장하고 정체성과 역량을 함께 키워갈 수 있도록 학부모님들과 소통하는 자리를 마련하게 되어 매우 뜻깊게 생각합니다. 오늘 이 자리가 서로의 생각을 나누고 앞으로의 방향을 함께 고민하는 소중한 시간이 되기를 바랍니다. 다시.
There's a Korean proverb that says education is a plan for 100 years. 교육지 100년 계획 in Korean. It reminds us that education requires long-term vision, careful planning, and sustainable commitments. As former President Obama was noted, Korea is among the most education-driven country in the world, and passion for learning has been a key force behind Korea's remarkable rise from the ancient Korean world to the becoming of the 10th largest economy in the world. Even today, Korea continues to be a top-tier country among OECD countries in terms of literacy rates and university enrollments. Today, I came here with two reasons. First, I would like to make a simple request to both educators and parents. Our Korean Education Center has been reopened in Daegu last year for 26 years. The primary mission of the Korean Education Center is to extend the Korean language program, in the United States. So that's why I encourage parents to, support their children in learning Korean, and I ask our, the education leaders to actively consider adopting Korean language program in your school districts. Why Korean and why now? Not simply because K-pop or K-culture is gaining global recognition. You don't need to perpetually sing along with olden to every Korean lyrics. The practical reason is that now the Korea become the top country in foreign investment in the United States. For the last 3 years, Korea invested more than $100 billion, and we hired 470,000, the employees in this country.
So much for that great introduction. I am so honored to be here in this space. Thank you so much to the association for holding this first so important education forum. It is a long time coming that we are in this space together. So thank you to our community members, our families, our students, and those of you who are here to just begin this dialogue. This should not feel like a one-off. This should be a dialogue that we are beginning and thinking about how we can go deeper. So I'm just going to share a little bit about my personal story, how that has bridged into my core values around education. And then I want to do some framing as we will go deeper during the panel discussion with my esteemed colleagues that are here today. So I want to start by sharing the journey of my parents who happen to be here. My parents immigrated to the United States in the Midwest in the early 70s. Many of you may have similar stories. They came with my sister who was 1 year old at the time and later gave birth to me and my other sister. Both of my parents were college educated but did not have the English language. And access to jobs and access to learning were far different in the 70s than they are today in 2026. So that being said, My dad worked really hard, blue-collar jobs, to make sure that our family would be provided for. They later become business owners, which many of you can relate to, especially as Korean immigrants. Becoming business owners, what they did for us is they really modeled the importance of high work ethic and high expectations. And many times it felt like a lot of tough love, even today, with those high expectations, but it has led to the success for my sisters, my parents, and myself, and today our very own children. So for that, I'm very thankful. In the 80s, my mom's brothers and sisters immigrated to the country in Wisconsin, of all places. Back then, English language services didn't really exist. And what they did for my school-age cousins as they lived with us and assimilated into the country for a few months is that if my cousin was a 5th grader in Korea, in America, they would put them a grade level below. The message that that sent in the 80s was that if you don't have the English language, then your rigor and your grade level content will be decreased. I didn't realize that back then. I was a child. Fast forward to 2000, when I became a teacher in Tukwila, Washington, very proudly serving one of the most diverse school districts in our country. There's a high immigrant population and many socioeconomic challenges in that specific school district. And when I thought about and I learned about the best practices of multilingual education services, that is when I had the epiphany of how inequitable and wrong the way that my cousins in the 80s were served or not served to become fluent in English language. That is where the core value of equity really became alive in who I am personally and professionally. I started to see that students didn't have access to books at home. We're working hard 7.5 hours a day as classroom teachers, trying to build literacy fluency and get our students to read, especially as a primary school teacher. What I learned is students didn't have access to books. They didn't have access to resources. And that's where community partnerships were leveraged to not just get books in the hands of students in the classroom, but to get books in the hands across the whole school with partnerships and wonderful grants from Starbucks and from our local organizations like Page Ahead. So that was when I was like, I'm really excited about understanding who I am and where those core values of equity are coming from my early years in the 80s till today. And I continued to think about how can I make further system impacts and pursue the principalship and later district leadership. So I just want to share that that is where those passions come. The stories that we all have, the stories that we all should be brave and proud to share are who make us who we are today and how our core values are born. And that's your colleges. There are handfuls, there are thousands and piles of students with transcripts with 3.9s and 4.0s. That is amazing. High test scores, but please note that many schools are test blind or testing optional, where they're no longer even looking at those College Board tests. What's really important is that colleges are really looking and seeing how the whole child or how the whole person is coming into these institutions. How are we in public education ensuring that students are well-rounded, that they have leadership skills, that they have authentic volunteer opportunities, that they are engaging in the public service in authentic ways? Because those college essays have a lot of weight. And so it's really important that as families and parents and students that we understand, yes, GPAs and academic achievement matter, but so does being able to thrive in this world, have the soft skills, and have the leadership and that global citizenship that you will bring and make those institutions proud. It's important also, and the last thing I'll share is accessibility. I think oftentimes in education, we make assumptions that parents know how to log into student information systems, that they know how to log into Canvas or the school district app. And many times in school districts, we just think that, well, it's all in the app or it's in the email. Well, parents may be working hard and might not have time to check email. They might not have the technology skills. which I know that the Greater Seattle Korean Association is providing those kinds of opportunities. I read about that. That's amazing. They may not have the language, and just because we say that the language can be translated, where's that button on the website that even shows that you can translate? So when we think about accessibility and how we're going to provide families with resources, is it really the modality that is the preferred way, especially if we want two-way communication, not just giving and presenting information? So those are ways that we are constantly thinking in public education. How will we hear more of the voices? And we very often, in my 26 plus years of education, the voices that I hear the least of are from the Asian American community.
I do all my extracurricular activities. Ever since I was little, I always wanted an older sister. Unfortunately, I am the older sister to 2 siblings. Fortunately, I've been blessed with 4 high school alumni who have looked out for me and supported me throughout freshman year. I couldn't have made it through this year without them. They're my loudest cheerleaders when I'm on the court or when I'm running 12 laps around the track. I'm so grateful to have the support, and I think everyone should have an UNMI in their life. As high school students explore their interests, it would be helpful to have a one-on-one mentorship program to offer insight and guidance for high school students. Using a network of high school alumni and community members in different industries to form one-on-one partnerships with students, a mentorship program can expand opportunities for students to explore their interests early. Mentors can offer career guidance and hands-on experiences. For example, if a student was interested in the medical field, she or they could be paired with a doctor, like a forensic pathologist. Students could shadow them at work and learn how bodies can tell stories about medical diseases through autopsies, and students can learn about human anatomy. Or future mathematicians can be paired with an actuary to learn about risk assessment for businesses or physicists with one of the local aerospace companies. Students can partner with businesses, professionals, entrepreneurial mentors to discuss ideas and carry out product research. School districts are uniquely positioned to help coordinate a network of community and professional mentors. A high school sophomore attending Bellevue High School. One thing you should know about me is that I grew up closely connected to the Korean community. And although I was born here in the US, I attended a Korean-speaking preschool and have remained involved in Korean community spaces. This background shaped my interest in how students from immigrant families, including those born in the US, navigate the US education system, particularly when their parents are unfamiliar with it. In middle school, I supported a newly arrived student from Korea as a buddy, which gave me a closer understanding of the challenges students from immigrant families face. For example, she did not know how to use the school lunch systems or that she needed to load money into her account to purchase meals. So she continued bringing lunches from home until she eventually learned how the system worked. In high school, I've seen similar patterns in more complex situations, such as the college application process, where some students feel overwhelmed navigating a system that is unfamiliar not only to them, but also to their parents, especially when language barriers make it difficult to seek help from counselors or teachers. However, these challenges are not limited to newly arrived students. Many students who are born and raised in the US face similar barriers when their parents are unfamiliar with the education system, whether due to language gaps or limited experience with secondary or higher education.
Friends to name a single person on their city council, school board, or even who their state representative was, I don't think they'd be able to name them. My name is William Yoon, and I'm a junior at Interlake High School, and the reason for this problem is very simple. Nobody ever taught us to care about how our own community works in the first place. In school, we memorize the 3 branches, maybe learn how a bill becomes a law, and then we graduate without knowing how our own school gets funded, who sits on our city council, or what we can do to influence the policies that end up affecting us. And it hits us hardest at the local and state level, which is ironic because that's the decisions that shape our daily lives that actually get made. I started an organization called Youth Civic Bridge, and I've testified at the state legislature on education funding, but I didn't get involved because of anything I learned in a classroom. I got involved because the system around me happened to work for me and show me these opportunities existed. Most students, however, don't have them, and that's the equity problem. Access to civic knowledge right now depends on who you know and what you know, what family you come from. The students most affected by policy decisions, students in underfunded schools, immigrant families, first-generation students are often the least equipped to advocate for themselves. So
Good evening, my name is Jane Norris. 30 seconds is not a whole lot of time, so I'll get straight to where I started. I was born in Korea and moved here when I was about 8 and a half, and experiencing both the Korean education system and the US system. I'm one of those people who like to think about the systems and the bigger picture and realize the complexities and also implications and how a system could have an impact on a person's life, and realize that it's really a great space to have a positive impact in our larger community. So that's where I started. I wanted to have our community to be stronger, healthier, and also have access. And that was the beginning of my journey. I got my degrees in education, in special education, and I wanted to be the best teacher I could possibly to address all the different needs, from the classroom to special ed to highly capable, you name it. I wanted that tool, so I went for it. But at the same time, I wanted to make sure that the system changes. And long story short, that's the reason why I'm here on the school board. Thanks.
Hello everyone, my name is Susie, and I like to say that I'm the product of the U.S. military overseas. My mother is Korean and my father was in the U.S. military. My father was he's the 12th, he's the youngest child out of 12, raised in very poor Memphis growing up. And so when I think about education, I think about my parents a lot, and I think about my own experience. And a lot of it has to do with trying to figure out education as a system, whether you are coming from poverty or if you're coming from language gaps. And so that's what orients me around schools. I was an English teacher, and English did not come easy to me because I grew up in Hawaii with pidgin English, with a mother who spoke Konglish. And so my English skills took a long time to develop and evolve. And so when I work with families and students, I think always about how people are accessing language.
So I won't repeat what you already heard, but I actually wanted to be a news reporter. Can you see it? I wanted to do broadcast journalism. I interned at TV stations and wrote for University of Washington's daily newspaper. And my dad would say, "You really love kids. You should look into education." And that's where I started volunteering. I looked into a postgraduate program, and I never looked back. And so that is where I began, and it's really because of my love for children. On a personal and professional level, I am a mama bear, and what I want for my own kids is what I want for everybody's kids. And so being an advocate for children and what's best for them, and then also what keeps me in education and keeps me in this political sphere is the importance of advocating for social and racial justice.
Hi, my name is Andy, and I guess what got me into running for school board was most of my career I worked in mental health. As of recent, before starting my own behavioral health company, I worked over at Seattle Children's. I was the first behavior analyst to be hired at the hospital, where my role was to create an inpatient psychiatric program for kids with both newly diagnosed developmental disabilities and mental health. One of the overlapping conditions that I recognized as I also took on the role of case management was there was a lack of accessibility for students who were managing and fighting and working through their mental health while also trying to balance their education. And I think for me, the turning point was recognizing with a lot of these students was not that they didn't have the capabilities, but then that there was a lack of accessibility. And so I looked into the community to see what the resources looked like and what were the potential barriers that were preventing a lot of these students from accessing core educational services. One of the things in research that we can turn to is with higher quality education coincides with higher quality of all. And so in order to serve the entire students, I investigated further and took my first step into entering, I guess, public office in a way where I felt if I was not invited to the table, then I would bring my own chair to the table. And so that's how I barged my way in, and this is where I sit today, where I advocate heavily on special education, inclusion, and looking at how we can further dismantle the barriers that currently exist in these systems, where we try to force most of the community to fit into these molds that were created for students who did not look like them.
Hi, good evening. I'm Vivian Song. I'm the school board director for Seattle Public Schools. I'm in my second term now. In 2021, I decided to run for school board because at the time we were just emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic, and we were trying to make a decision as a district about when to return students to in-person learning. And they did a survey, and I learned that a lot of our Asian American students were actually very scared about coming back to in-person learning because they were worried about being bullied and blamed for the pandemic. And I looked around and I was kind of surprised, given a community as diverse as Seattle, that there were no elected East Asian leaders in Seattle, not on our school board, not on our city council. So I decided to put my hat in the ring. But I wanted to also make sure that I'm not an education expert like some of my fellow panelists. I wanted to make sure that I can make a positive contribution to my community. So I very much live to that stereotype at being Asian and really good at math. I'm a finance professional, and so I have spent a lot of my time examining our budget and trying to make sure that we are putting resources where they're most needed and have greatest impact. Available for our students to pursue more technical jobs. I have been partnering with the Seattle Building Trades to make sure that we have apprenticeship programs, pre-apprenticeship programs for our students. They get great hands-on experience, and it leads to great employment opportunities. Another area that I'm very interested in, if we look at the data as who is not attending a four-year college, it is disproportionately male. And
A safe place for kids to practice the skills that they need for life, not just academics, not worries. They don't go just for content, they go to practice. And so we have to let them experience the ups and downs of what it is to be a person. But to do that, we also need to create a safe environment, safe space to do that, which means it has to go from top down, which means vision, values, all of those things have to align. Policies, procedures, all of those also has to support a positive, inclusive model. And with that is also staff and parents and students need to understand, what does that really mean? What does inclusive mean? As we need to make sure that staff are well trained for what does equity mean, what does culturally competence means, how are they being measured, how do they create a sense of belonging? There's a lot of research that says a sense of belonging is an absolute must for a student to thrive.
For basic social emotional development, or they might need small group interventions and support around social emotional skills, we made sure that there was a counselor in every school. So last school year, we made the budget decision to centralize the budget so that we could make sure that, yes, we want principals to have autonomy of budget decisions, but we also, as a system of coherence across 44 schools, need to make sure that students have access to a counselor, which was not the case last school year. So now we have counselors in every school. Something else that we've done to ensure that families have those resources and they have the best practices and vetted resources is we put a building family liaison.
Make sure that your student has proper sleep hygiene. Turning down the phone a couple of hours before bedtime, making sure that they have a quiet, dark room to sleep in.
I would say one thing that I see areas where we see less involvement are spaces outside of the schools. What do extracurriculars look like? What are some other community-based resources, activities, and exercises that you guys are also involved in?
And when we think about the overall well-being of that student, how can we take the information outside of school and also take that into consideration as to what might be impacting your learner in that moment? And so sometimes it's beyond the classroom, and I think parents oftentimes can get lost in how many involvements that their students are in. And so just taking a more holistic approach in assessing the entirety of your student.
Dr. Song said exactly what I would have said, but probably better. So I'm going to pass this one on.
One thing, continue to check grades and ask about school. Find out what's going on and who their friends are, what's going on, find out all the tea, like the gossip. Just know what's happening.
I would say, and this is more geared towards high school students than anything else, and maybe middle school age as well, is I know kids start, you guys like to ask your kids, what do you want to be, or you tell your kids what they should be. I would suggest you check in with them and say, what are your concerns? What's worrying you? And then empower them to see how they can solve that problem, because that gives you a couple of things. One, you're developing passion, and two, you're tooling them with things, giving them a pathway to solve a problem that is stressing them and causing anxiety. And believe it or not, our students are feeling an enormous amount of stress and anxiety, way more than we ever did at their age right now. And so the more you give them empowerment and help them and find ways to alleviate that, they'll thrive.